Marianne reread her resume for the third time, tapping her fingers nervously on the wooden table. The cup of unfinished coffee had long since gone cold, and the clock on the wall was inexorably approaching 9 in the morning. "You know you memorized it by heart, right?" came a familiar voice from behind her. Matteo walked over to his wife and placed his hands on her shoulders, massaging her gently. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart." Marianne looked up and smiled weakly. 3 years of marriage had taught her to appreciate these moments, the quiet moments in the morning when the whole world seemed to stand still in anticipation of a new day. Matteo always knew how to find the right words of encouragement, even in the most anxious moments. "What if I can't handle it?" Mariana turned to her husband. "It's a city clinic. There's so much responsibility." "That's why they'll be happy to get a specialist like you." Matteo kissed her forehead. "You've been in private practice for 3 years. You have excellent references. And anyway, can anyone resist your smile?" Marianne laughed, feeling some of the tension recede. She rose from the table and walked over to the hallway mirror. The austere dark blue suit fit perfectly. She had deliberately ironed it twice yesterday. Her hair was gathered in a neat bundle, her makeup discreet but emphasizing the correct features of her face. "Maybe I should wear different shoes?" She looked questioningly at her black loafers. "Mariana." Matteo stood beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You look flawless. And it's only a job interview. They'll see your professionalism, not the color of your shoes." At that moment, the mooing of cows came from the yard. It was the beginning of a normal workday at the Torres farm. Matteo glanced at his watch. "I have to go. My father is waiting. But I'm sure we'll be celebrating your new appointment tonight." He kissed his wife and headed for the exit, but at the very door he turned around. "And don't forget our agreement. Immediately after the interview you call me, no matter what the result will be." Left alone, Marianne once again checked the contents of her bag. Documents, resume, phone, keys. Everything was in place. It was a 15-minute walk to the clinic, so she decided to walk to clear her head. The morning streets of their small town were already full of life. The vendor at the vegetable stand was arranging fresh fruit. Elderly women were hurrying to church for morning mass. School children with backpacks were hurrying to class. Marianne walked the familiar route, trying to breathe deeply and measuredly as her mother had taught her. The clinic building appeared ahead, a 3-story building, painted light yellow, with wide windows and a neat flower bed in front of the entrance. Marianne stopped at the door, took a deep breath and stepped inside. A smiling receptionist greeted her in the waiting room. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Good morning, I'm Mariana Rojas. I have an interview scheduled with Dr. Ortiz at 9:30. Yes, you are expected. Walk down the hall to the end, then to the right. The head doctor's office will be the last one." Marianne thanked and headed down the indicated route. The corridors of the clinic were bright and clean, smelling of medicines and disinfectants, a familiar and painful smell that had become almost familiar over the years of work. Dr. Alejandro Ortiz appeared to be a tall, middle-aged man with a shrewd gaze and graying temples. He politely pointed to Mariana's chair. "Have a seat, Señora Rojas. I've perused your resume, very impressive. Tell me why you decided to move from private practice to us." Mariana straightened her back, gathering her thoughts. She had rehearsed this question dozens of times. "Private practice gave me invaluable experience, but I always wanted to work where my help was needed most. In a city clinic, there are more opportunities to help people who really need medical help." The interview lasted nearly an hour. Dr. Ortiz asked many professional questions, listened carefully to the answers, and sometimes made notes in his notebook. Mariana could feel the initial tension gradually fading away. She knew her business and could talk about it for hours. "Well, Señora Rojas," the head doctor finally said, setting aside his pen, "I think we can offer you a place on our team. When are you ready to start work?" Mariana's heart jumped with joy, but outwardly she tried to maintain a professional calm. "I could start next week, if that's okay with you." "Fine. I'll expect you on Monday at 8 in the morning then. Our head nurse will show and tell you everything." Leaving the office, the first thing Mariana did was to take out her cell phone and dial her husband's number. Matteo answered after the second beep. "How's it going?" "I've been taken," she blurted out, no longer holding back her emotions. "I told you so. My wife is the best. We'll celebrate tonight. I'll pick you up after work." Returning home, Marianne felt an unprecedented burst of energy. She went to the store and bought groceries for the dinner. Matteo loved her special roast with vegetables. In the evening, they sat on the terrace of their small house, sipping wine and enjoying the warm evening. From the direction of the farm came the familiar sounds, the mooing of cows, the distant barking of dogs, the rustle of leaves in the garden. "To my talented wife," Matteo raised his glass. "You deserve this job." "To a husband who always believes in me," Marianne smiled back, clinking her glass with his. They talked about the future, costing plans. Matteo talked about things on the farm, how his father was gradually handing over the reins to him. Mariana shared her hopes for her new job, dreamed of how she would be able to help more people. Everything seemed right and secure that night. Their cozy little world was filled with love and understanding. Marianne could not have known that very soon this idyll would crumble like a house of cards, and the man she trusted immensely would stab her in the heart. Monday began unaccustomedly early for Marianne. She got up at 6 in the morning when the pre-dawn gloom was still outside the window. Matteo mumbled sleepily and rolled over, and she tiptoed to the bathroom. The first day of work in a new clinic required special care in everything. Marianne meticulously examined herself in the mirror, adjusting her snow-white robe. She had bought it especially for her new job, starched, with perfectly ironed pockets and a shiny metal clasp. The name tag she was to pin on it was neatly engraved, "Mariana Rojas, Therapist." In the kitchen, she found a note from Matteo. "Good luck, love. You'll do fine." Next to it was a basket of fresh croissants. Apparently, he had gotten up early and gone to the bakery. That little care made her heart warm. At the clinic, she was met by the head nurse Rosario, a full woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a determined character. She led Mariana around the department, showing her everything she needed. "Here we have a treatment room. Here is the residence room. In this cabinet are stored patient charts. We have not yet converted everything into electronic format. And here's your office, number 204. The office was bright and spacious, with a large window overlooking the courtyard of the clinic. Standard furniture, a desk, a couch for examination, a cabinet for instruments, but all clean and neat. "You have your first patient at 9, Rosario informed her. "In the meantime, meet your colleagues. They're gathering in the residence lounge before they start their appointments." The residence room was bustling with activity. Doctors and nurses gathered before the workday began, some drinking coffee, some reviewing paperwork. Marianne felt a slight stirring. The eyes of everyone present turned to her. "Meet our new therapist, Mariana Rojas," Rosario introduced her. "Welcome to the team." Welcoming voices rang out. A young dark-haired girl sitting by the window smiled especially welcomingly. "I'm Catalina Mendoza, also a therapist. Have a seat with us," she motioned, making room on the couch. Mariana gratefully accepted the invitation. Catalina handed her a cup of freshly brewed coffee. "The first day is always a little scary, but we have a good team. This is my second year working here, so if you need anything, you're welcome." During the day, Marianne crossed paths with Catalina several times. She was indeed very helpful. She helped her to understand the computer system, showed her where everything was in the treatment room, introduced her to the lab technicians. At lunch, they met again in the small cafeteria at the clinic. Catalina waved her hand, beckoning Marianne to her table. "How's the first day? Not too tiring?" "A little dizzy with all the new information," Marianne admitted, taking a seat. "But the patients have been good." "Oh, you haven't met Donna Carmen yet," Catalina laughed. "She comes in every week with a new ailment. Last week I was sure she had malaria because I read about it in a magazine." They got to talking. Catalina proved to be easy to talk to, with a good sense of humor. She told funny stories from her practice and gave useful tips on dealing with the locals. "How long have you been in our town?" she inquired. 3 years, since I got married. Mateo is a local. His family owns a farm on the outskirts of town." "Oh, the Torres family? I know. They supply milk to all the local stores. I've lived here most of my life, but I only went to the capital to study. That's where I met my husband. He's an architect. We came back here 2 years ago." The day flew by unnoticed. When the last patient left, Marianne was surprised to find that it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. She was putting her things in her bag when Catalina came into the office. "Listen, the girls and I sometimes get together on Fridays after work to sit and chat. Would you like to join us?" Marianne was excited at the invitation. "I'd love to, thank you. See you tomorrow then, and don't worry, you did great today." On the way home, Marianne thought about how lucky she was with her co-workers, especially Catalina. In a small town, new acquaintances are worth their weight in gold, and finding a friend with whom there are common topics of conversation is a real luck. At home, Mateo was waiting for her with dinner. He had prepared her favorite seafood pasta. "Tell me about it," he demanded, arranging the food on plates. Marianne excitedly shared her impressions of her first day on the job, her new colleagues, her patients. Mateo listened attentively, asking questions, delighted with her progress. "I also met a very nice girl, Catalina. She's a therapist too. She's been helping me get settled in all day." "See, I told you it would be fine," Mateo smiled. "You have a way of getting people to like you." The next days flew by, one after another. Mariana gradually got used to the new rhythm of life, familiarized herself with the peculiarities of work in the state clinic, got to know her patients. Catalina often dropped by between appointments. They had lunch together, shared stories from their lives. On Friday, as promised, there was a small girls' get-together in a cafe near the clinic. In addition to Mariana and Catalina, 2 other nurses came, Consuelo and Paola. They talked about work, about families, about the latest city news. Mariana felt herself gradually becoming part of this small, friendly group. In the evening, lying in bed, she thought about how her life had changed during that week. New job, new acquaintances, new opportunities. Everything was working out exactly as she had dreamed. Mateo had been right. She had indeed made it. And who knows, maybe her friendship with Catalina would be another pleasant gift from fate in her new life. As she fell asleep, Mariana could not imagine that this friendship would be the beginning of a chain of events that would destroy her so reliable and happy life. Saturday morning was unusually hectic for Marianne. She had been rushing around the house since dawn, checking the shopping list, arranging fresh flowers in vases, and wiping the already shining dishes for the 100th time. Tonight, she and Mateo were hosting Catalina and her husband for the first time. "Honey, don't you think you've overdone it?" Mateo watched with a smile as his wife rearranged the decorative cushions on the couch for the 3rd time. "It's just a friendly dinner. I want everything to be perfect." Mariana paused in front of the mirror, fixing a disheveled strand of hair. "You know, Catalina has been so helpful in getting me settled in at the clinic, and then, in a small town, it's important to maintain good relations with your neighbors." Mateo walked over to his wife and put his arm around her shoulders. "You know that even if you had just ordered pizza, it would still have been a wonderful evening, right? You have a special gift for creating coziness." Marianne squeezed gratefully against her husband, but immediately realized, "Oh, I still have to make the sauce for the meat, and chopped the salad. In the kitchen, she was working on her specialty, beef in wine sauce with herbs. It was a recipe her mother-in-law, Estella, had taught her in their first year of marriage. "The way to a man's heart is through his stomach," she had said then, showing her daughter-in-law the secrets of the local cuisine. Matteo set the table. He took out the best wine glasses, a wedding gift from his parents, and laid out the new linen napkins that Marianne had bought especially for the evening. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood Catalina and her husband Ricardo, a tall, statuesque man with an attentive look and a kind smile. He had a bottle of red wine in his hands, and Catalina held a basket of homemade pastries. "I hope we're not too late?" Catalina hugged Marianne. It smells so good." "Come in, please." Matteo held out his hand to Ricardo. "I'm Matteo. Welcome to our home." The guests made their way into the living room. Ricardo looked around with interest. "You have a very cozy place. Are those beams on the ceiling original?" "Yes, I inherited the house from my grandfather," Matteo nodded. "We only updated the interior a bit when we got married. Mariana insisted on light colors." "Excellent decision," Ricardo approved. "As an architect, I always pay attention to such details. Preserving historical elements while creating a modern space is an art." The men quickly found common ground discussing the features of period buildings. It turned out that Ricardo had been involved in the restoration of several buildings in the city center. Mariana and Catalina, meanwhile, were setting the table. Catalina admired every little detail, from the embroidered napkins to the antique silver sauce pot. "How lovely! Is this a family heirloom?" "Yes, left over from Grandma Matteo. She collected such things. And your baked goods look delicious. Is it a secret recipe?" "Grandma's," Catalina nodded. "It took me a long time to learn how to repeat it. You know, there's something special about old recipes. They keep the family history alive." Once everyone was seated at the table, the conversation flowed easily and casually. Ricardo talked about his projects. Matteo shared his plans for modernizing the farm. Catalina laughingly recounted amusing incidents from her medical practice. "Do you remember that patient last week?" She turned to Mariana. "The one who came in complaining of back pain, and it turned out he'd just forgotten to take the heating pad out from under his shirt?" Everyone laughed. The evening passed in a warm, almost family-like atmosphere. Marianne caught herself thinking that it had been a long time since she had felt so at ease with new acquaintances. After dinner, they moved into the living room. Matteo opened the second bottle of wine Ricardo had brought. The conversation turned to how who met. "Ricardo and I met in the capital, in a student cafe," Catalina told him, settling into an armchair with a glass of wine. "I was in my last year of medical school at the time, and he was already working in an architectural firm. And Matteo and I have known each other since we were kids," Mariana smiled. "Although we only started dating when I came back here after my studies. I waited 3 years for her to pay attention to me," Matteo winked. "Worth it." From the open window came the chirping of crickets and the distant barking of dogs. The evening chill was gradually displacing the heat of the day. Fresh flowers from Marianne's flower bed were fragrant in a vase on the table, creating a special atmosphere of coziness. "You know, let's go on a picnic next weekend," Catalina suggested suddenly. "There's a lovely place outside the city by the river. Ricardo and I often go there." "That's a great idea." Matteo perked up. "I just know a secluded clearing not far from our farm. There's an amazing view of the mountains there." They talked for a long time more about future plans, shared life stories, and laughed at jokes. When the clock struck 11, Catalina glanced regretfully at the time. "Oh, we seem to have overstayed our welcome. It's a work day tomorrow." "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Ricardo shook Matteo's hand. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed making new acquaintances so much." After seeing the guests off, Mariana and Matteo cleared the table together. It felt light and joyful. "I think it went great," Matteo said as he put the plates in the dishwasher. "Ricardo is a great guy. He's fun to talk to. And Catalina is so sincere," Mariana echoed, wiping down the countertop. "You know, I'm glad we've become friends." Later, lying in bed, Marianne went over the moments of the evening in her mind. Everything had worked out perfectly. The treats had succeeded, the conversation hadn't died down for a minute, and the atmosphere had been exactly what she dreamed of. There was a picnic ahead of them, new meetings, perhaps joint celebrations. But at that moment she noticed a strange expression on Matteo's face as he said goodbye to the guests. Something elusive, almost imperceptible. Marianne immediately dismissed the thought. Perhaps it was just an impression. It had been a long evening and everyone was tired. She closed her eyes and almost immediately fell into a dream, not even suspecting that this evening would be the beginning of a chain of events that would turn her life upside down. 2 weeks passed after that memorable dinner. Life went on as usual. Marianne got used to the new routine at the clinic, and her friendship with Catalina grew stronger and stronger. They often had lunch together, discussed patients, shared stories of their lives. One morning, Marianne stayed late in the clinic's archives, sorting through old patient records. She needed to find the medical history of an elderly patient, and she methodically went through the yellowed folders. The archives were located in a semi-basement room that was rarely seen. Suddenly, she heard muffled voices behind the shelves. One of them was definitely Matteo's. Marianne froze in surprise. What was her husband doing in the clinic during working hours? He had given no warning of his visit. "You shouldn't come here." The second voice belonged to a woman, but because of the echo, Mariana couldn't pinpoint exactly who it was. "It's too risky." "I couldn't wait any longer." Matteo's voice sounded unaccustomedly tense. "We need to talk." "Not now. Tonight, in the usual place." Distant footsteps were heard. Marianne peered cautiously out from behind the shelving unit, but saw only a flickering shadow near the exit. Her heart was beating somewhere in her throat. She tried to calm herself. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe it wasn't Matteo. But no, she couldn't mistake his voice for anyone else's. All day long, Mariana couldn't concentrate on her work. She made several mistakes in the documents, which had to be redone. Even Catalina noticed her condition. "You seem distracted today. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just didn't get enough sleep," Mariana lied, avoiding looking her friend in the eye. In the evening, Matteo came home as usual at 7 o'clock. He smelled of hay and milk, the usual farm smells. He kissed his wife on the cheek and began to talk about the previous day, about the new equipment he and his father were planning to buy for the dairy. Marianne scrutinized his face, trying to catch any sign of anxiety or guilt, but Matteo was the same as always, calm, confident, loving. Maybe she was really imagining things? For the next few days, she tried to put the incident out of her mind. Working at the clinic required complete concentration, and the patients were becoming more and more numerous. Catalina often dropped by between appointments. Imagine, a patient came to me today complaining of pain in her knee. It turned out that she had been walking around with a pinched nerve for 3 months because she was afraid to go to the doctor. Marianne smiled, nodded, kept the conversation going, but something had changed. She began to notice little things she hadn't seen before. For example, how Catalina sometimes abruptly shut up half a word when talking about family life, or how she carefully avoided talking about where she spent her evenings. There were changes at home, too. Matteo was staying late at work more and more often, explaining it was because of new projects on the farm. When they sat together at dinner, he was more silent, absorbed in his own thoughts. And if Mariana tried to talk about Catalina and Ricardo, he quickly turned the conversation to another topic. "Why don't we invite them to visit again?" Marianne once suggested. "That evening was so wonderful." "I don't think now is a good time," Matteo replied without taking his eyes off his plate. "I have a lot of work to do on the farm." At the clinic, Marianne began to notice strange looks from her coworkers. When she entered the residence lounge, conversation sometimes quieted down. The nurses would whisper behind her back, but as soon as she turned around, everyone pretended to be busy working. One day she overheard a snippet of conversation between two nurses in the hallway. "And did you see how they—" "Quiet! Marianne might hear." A vague suspicion began to haunt her. She began to keep a closer eye on Matteo's schedule, checking his cell phone when he left it at home. But she found nothing suspicious. The usual work calls, messages from suppliers, pictures of cows and new equipment. One evening, Mariana decided to stop by the farm herself, ostensibly to bring Matteo a home-cooked meal. His pickup truck was parked in its usual spot, cows mooing in the corral, workers going about their daily business. Matteo found himself in the office. He was actually working on paperwork. What a pleasant surprise. He smiled when he saw his wife. "You spoil me." But something in his smile was wrong. Something subtly fake, like a strained mask. Or was it just her imagination? In the evenings, lying awake, Marianne replayed the events of the last few weeks in her head. That conversation in the archive, Catalina's strange behavior, Matteo's aloofness, the whispers behind her back. It all added up to a picture, but she was afraid to even think about what it might mean. At the clinic, work went on as usual. Patients came and went. Marianne wrote prescriptions, conducted examinations, filled out charts. Outwardly, everything looked normal, but inside there was growing anxiety. Catalina came into her office less often now. When they did come to her office, the conversation didn't go well. There was no trace of her former openness. She answered one-word answers, avoided making eye contact, hurried away under the pretext of urgent business. One day, Marianne tried to talk to Matteo about it. "Don't you think Catalina has been acting strange lately?" Matteo twitched, spilling his coffee on the tablecloth. "I hadn't noticed. What difference does it make? Everyone has their own problems." This reaction only increased Marianne's suspicions. She began keeping a mental diary of all the oddities, trying to catch a pattern. Matteo began to change shirts more often in the middle of the day. Sometimes he smelled an unfamiliar perfume. He explained that he had gone to the home improvement store. Catalina stopped wearing her wedding ring, citing an allergy to the metal. But every time the suspicions became too clear, something happened that made Marianne doubt her conclusions. Matteo would have a romantic candlelit dinner. Catalina would bring her homemade pastries, just as she had in the early days of their friendship. In the back of her mind, Mariana realized that all these oddities could not be coincidence. But she continued to cling to the familiar reality, to her cozy world, which began to slowly but inexorably collapse. She did not know that the most terrible discovery awaited her ahead, and that one day her life would be divided into before and after. On this Tuesday, Marianne awoke before dawn. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the measured breathing of Matteo sleeping next to her. The last weeks had been an endless series of anxious thoughts and doubts. Even in her sleep, she found no peace, waking several times a night at the slightest rustle. Trying not to wake her husband, she carefully got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The morning coolness was pleasantly refreshing. Marianne mechanically put the coffee pot on the stove and took out cups, a blue one for herself and a green one for Matteo. They had bought these cups in their first month of married life, and since then, it had become their little tradition. She remembered how not so long ago their mornings had begun with hugs and kisses, with long conversations over breakfast, with plans for the day. Now Matteo was in an increasing hurry to leave, citing urgent matters on the farm. His kisses had become brief, almost formal, and his conversations had been reduced to mundane details. A sleepy Mateo appeared in the doorway. "You're early today." He reached for his cup but didn't even look at his wife. "Didn't sleep." Marianne tried to catch his gaze. "Mateo, maybe we should talk." "About what?" He jabbed at his phone, checking messages. "I'm sorry, honey, but I have an important meeting with the suppliers today. We'll talk tonight, okay?" But she knew there would be no conversation tonight again. Either he'd be late for work, or he'd be too tired, or he'd come up with some other reason. At the clinic, the first thing Marianne did was head to her mother-in-law's office. Estella had been the head nurse here for over 20 years, and to Marianne, she had become not only a relative, but a wise mentor. "Come in, dear," Estella smiled welcomingly when she saw her sister-in-law. "You look so worried. What's wrong?" Marianne sank down in her chair, feeling her hands treacherously shaking. "I don't know, maybe I'm making it up, but Mateo has become so distant lately. He hardly ever talks to me. He's always rushing off somewhere. I try to talk to him, but he finds an excuse to avoid talking to me every time." Estella looked at her sister-in-law carefully. "You know, men can sometimes get too absorbed in their work. Javier went through periods like that too. The farm requires a lot of attention, especially now that Mateo is getting ready to take over." "It's not just the work," Mariana shook her head. "Something has changed. I can feel it, but I can't figure out what." Her mother-in-law took her hand. "My dear, in every marriage there are difficult periods. The important thing is not to give up. Do you remember when you met Mateo? How he wanted your attention. Those feelings don't just disappear." "What should I do?" "For starters, stop getting yourself worked up. Men don't like to be pressured. Try to create an atmosphere at home that makes him want to come back. Be gentle, caring. Pay more attention to yourself, a new hairstyle, a beautiful dress. Sometimes small changes are enough to refresh a relationship." Marianne listened to her mother-in-law's advice, and hope flickered in her soul. Maybe she really had gotten too caught up in her fears and suspicions. Maybe she just needed to try harder. All day she pondered Estella's words. After work, she went to the beauty parlor and made an appointment for a haircut and manicure. Then she spent a long time shopping for a new dress, a soft blue one, just the way Mateo liked it. She bought fresh produce for his favorite dinner. At home, she spent an hour preparing the meal, setting out the candles, putting on the new dress. When Mateo returned from work, she greeted him with a smile. "Dinner is almost ready. How was your day?" He looked around the set table in surprise. "What's the occasion?" "Just wanted to make you happy." She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him. "I missed you." Something akin to guilt flashed in his eyes for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together. "You look beautiful. New dress?" The evening went better than it had in weeks. They talked about work, reminiscing about funny stories from the past. Mateo even told a few jokes, just like old times. When they went to bed, he hugged her tighter than usual. For the next few days, Mariana diligently followed her mother-in-law's advice. She met her husband from work with a smile, interested in his affairs, did not ask unnecessary questions. In the morning, she prepared his favorite breakfast, watched her appearance. Gradually, the tension between them really began to subside. Mateo smiled more often, sometimes even stayed up late in the mornings to have coffee with her. On weekends, they would go to the market together, just like before. He began to tell her again about the plans for the farm, to consult her on important matters. The clinic was improving too. Catalina stopped avoiding her so obviously, even inviting her to lunch a few times. They talked about work, about patience, almost as they had in the first days of their acquaintance. Although the former openness of their relationship was no longer there, Marianne was pleased with this progress. One evening, Mateo brought home her favorite flowers, white lilies, just for fun. He smiled in response to her surprised look. "You deserve flowers for no reason." In that moment, Marianne felt that all her fears were in vain. Maybe it really was just a difficult period involving work and fatigue. Maybe they were just a little distant from each other, but now things were getting better. She carefully banished from herself thoughts about that conversation in the archives, about Catalina's strange behavior, about her husband's inexplicable absences. After all, the main thing was that everything was fine now. Their love is stronger than any doubts and suspicions. Falling asleep in her husband's arms, Mariana thought about how foolish it was to suspect him of something wrong. Mateo loves her. It's just that he works hard, caring about their future. And everything else is just a play of her imagination, inspired by fatigue and fears. She could not know that her fragile happiness would not last long, that very soon she would have to learn the truth that would destroy everything she so desperately wanted to believe. The spring sun was flooding Marianne's spacious office. She sat at her desk, reviewing medical charts, and for the first time in a long time she felt an almost forgotten peace. The last 2 weeks in her and Mateo's life had really changed for the better. He had become more attentive, calling more often in the middle of the day, interested in her affairs. Yesterday, he'd even suggested a romantic dinner on the weekend. A knock on the door interrupted her musings. Nurse Rosario peeked into the office. "Dr. Rojas, do you have a moment? There's a strange situation with patient Gomez's chart." Mariana set the paperwork aside. "Sure, come in." Rosario closed the door behind her and lowered her voice. "You see, I happened to overhear a conversation. I don't want to spread gossip, but it seems that Dr. Mendoza has something going on. She canceled all her patients today, said she wasn't feeling well, but I saw her in the park across the street, meeting someone." Mariana felt the muscles in her back tense. "Rosario, I don't think we should be discussing colleagues' personal lives." Yes, of course," the nurse said, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. So what's up with Gomez's chart?" They plunged into a discussion of work matters, but Rosario's words lodged a barbed hook in Mariana's mind. All day long she'd been catching odd looks from her co-workers. When she walked past the resident's room, there was a muffled whisper that faded as she approached. At lunchtime, Marianne decided to go to the park herself just to get some fresh air, she told herself. The day was warm, and the first leaves were blossoming on the trees. Mothers and children sat on benches. Elderly couples fed pigeons. Catalina was nowhere to be seen, but Mariana noticed Mateo's familiar pickup truck parked around the corner of a neighboring building. She forced herself to calm down. What business could her husband have in town? The farm is big. The vendors are plentiful. Back at the clinic, she plunged into her work, trying not to think about what she had seen. Patients changed each other. She wrote prescriptions, gave recommendations, filled out paperwork. The familiar routine helped to distract herself from anxious thoughts. After work, Marianne decided to stop by the market. She and Mateo agreed that today she would cook his favorite paella. In the vegetable section, she ran into the butcher's wife, Senora Morales. "Mariana, darling, I haven't seen you in a long time. How are you? How's Mateo?" "I'm fine, thank you. Here, I'm buying groceries for dinner." "I thought he wasn't home for dinner tonight. I saw his car at the restaurant in the square." Mariana felt her back grow cold. "You must be mistaken. Mateo has a lot of work to do on the farm today." Maybe. Senora Morales shook her head meaningfully. "You know, it's hard to hide anything in a small town. People always see everything." Mariana hurriedly finished her shopping and left. On the way home, she dialed Mateo's number. He answered after the 5th dial tone. Some noise heard in the background. "Yes, honey? Are you going to be late today?" "Yeah, sorry. Lots of paperwork to do. Don't expect me for dinner." There was an unfamiliar note in his voice. Tension, irritation, guilt? Marianne couldn't quite pinpoint it. At home, she mechanically chopped vegetables for paella, though she had no appetite at all. It was getting dark outside the window, and the clock in the kitchen was ticking, counting down the minutes of the endless evening. The phone was silent. Matteo returned around 10. He smelled of cologne, not the cologne he usually used. On the collar of his shirt, Marianne noticed a trace of lipstick, barely noticeable, but still. "Sorry I'm late." He pecked her cheek and went straight into the shower. Marianne sat in the kitchen looking at the paella that had cooled. Her mind was reeling with scraps of conversation, random glances, and the loose ends of the last few days. Catalina's strange behavior, her husband's inexplicable absences, the whispers behind her back. It all added up to a picture, but she refused to believe the obvious. The next day at the clinic, Catalina greeted her with a smile as if nothing had happened. "Good morning. How was your evening?" Marianne looked at her friend carefully. She looked a little tired but happy. She had a new pendant around her neck. Marianne had never seen it before. "Fine," she tried to smile back. "Lots of work." "Yeah, I had to stay late with some paperwork yesterday." Catalina averted her gaze. "You know how it is." At that moment, Rosario appeared in the hallway. Seeing them together, she shook her head meaningfully and hurried off around the corner. The day dragged on interminably long. Mariana worked on autopilot, her thoughts far away. She remembered how she had met Matteo, their first date, the marriage proposal, the wedding, how they made plans for the future, dreamed of children, of their own home. In the evening, Matteo was late at work again. Marianne sat in their bedroom going through family photos. Here they are on their honeymoon, so happy in love. Here they are celebrating their first wedding anniversary. Here's New Year's Eve at his parents' house. Matteo's phone, forgotten on the nightstand, vibrated with an incoming message. Mariana knew she shouldn't look at it, but her hand reached for the screen on its own. The message was from Catalina. "Can't make it tonight. Ricardo is at home." Mariana put the phone down and sat motionless for a long time. Somewhere in the back of her mind she had known the truth for a long time. She just refused to accept it. All these weeks she had clung to the illusion of a happy marriage, closed her eyes to the obvious signs, made excuses for her husband's strange behavior. But now everything fell into place. The conversation in the archives and Matteo's detachment and Catalina's strange behavior and the whispers behind her back. The reality was exactly as she had feared it would be. She wasn't crying. There was an emptiness inside, cold and endless. Marianne sat in the darkness of the bedroom, listening to the clock ticking on the wall, the wind outside the window, the dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Her perfect world was crumbling, shattering, and she didn't know what to do next. When Matteo came home, she was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. He quietly undressed and lay down beside her, keeping his usual distance. In the darkness, Mariana opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. She didn't yet know what she would do, but she knew something had to happen tomorrow. It could not go on like this. That morning, for the first time in 3 years of marriage, Marianne did not make breakfast. She dressed quietly while Matteo was still asleep, left a short note, "Gone to work early," and left the house. The cool morning air cleared her thoughts a little, but there was still an emptiness inside. It wasn't even 7 o'clock when she arrived at the clinic. The empty corridors greeted her with a resounding silence. Marianne mechanically changed into her work clothes, sat at her desk and stared out the window. Behind the glass, the city was waking up. Stores were opening. The first cars were passing by. Early passers-by were hurrying to work. Her phone vibrated, a message from Matteo. "Why didn't you wake me? Is everything okay?" She didn't bother answering. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like making up another lie to save their marriage. The day dragged on endlessly. Patients replaced each other. Marianne worked on automatic, listening to complaints, writing prescriptions, making appointments. Her professionalism did not allow her to show what a storm was raging inside. At lunch, She didn't go to the cafeteria for fear of running into Catalina. Instead, she bought a coffee from the vending machine and sat in her empty office, staring at her phone screen. There were 3 more messages from Mateo, each more thoughtful than the last. The hypocrisy of those words caused only bitterness. After lunch, Catalina looked into the office. "Mariana, you look pale today. Can I get you some tea?" Marianne looked up at the woman she considered a friend. Catalina looked flawless, a new blouse, neat makeup, the same friendly smile on her lips. How easily she was able to play the part. "No, thank you," Marianne's voice sounded even. "There's a lot of work to do." "Then I won't intrude." Catalina lingered in the doorway for a moment. "But if you need anything, I'm around." That phrase was the last straw. Marianne felt she could no longer stay within the 4 walls. She canceled the remaining patients, citing indisposition, and went outside. The city lived its usual life. The pavilion on the corner sold fresh flowers. The aroma of bread came from the bakery. People hurried along the sidewalk. Marianne walked without a definite goal, just to move, not to think, not to feel. Her feet led her to the city park. Here she and Mateo often walked on weekends, fed the ducks in the pond, made plans for the future. Every bench, every tree held memories of happy moments in their lives. Marianne sat down on a vacant bench in the shade of an old maple tree. The sun was playing in the leaves. Birds were singing somewhere. Nature did not notice human dramas, continuing its eternal cycle. Suddenly she heard a familiar laugh. Turning her head, Mariana saw them, Mateo and Catalina. They were sitting on a far bench, partially hidden by lilac bushes. But even from this distance it was obvious how close they leaned toward each other, how his hand rested on her shoulder, how intimate their conversation. Marianne froze, unable to move. It was as if time had stopped. She watched her husband gently remove a strand of hair from her friend's face. Catalina smiled at him, that special smile that had been reserved for Ricardo, as they slowly reached out to each other for a kiss. At that moment, a child with a balloon ran past, his joyful cry shattering the daze. Marianne got up and walked quickly away from the park. She didn't make out the road, just walked forward, trying to dull the pain inside with physical movement. Betrayal. What an accurate word. It tore at her from the inside out, poisoning every breath, every memory. Every moment of their life together now seemed fake. The family dinners, the shared holidays, the friendly get-togethers. How long had they led her around by the nose? How many times had they laughed at her gullibility? Marianne stopped only when the sun began to slip toward dusk. She found herself in an unfamiliar part of town, among old houses with peeling paint. She pulled out her phone. 15 missed calls from Mateo, 3 messages from Catalina asking if everything was okay. I didn't want to go home. The thought of having to sit at the same table with Mateo, listening to his lies, pretending everything was normal, the thought was physically painful. But there was nowhere to go either. At that moment, she thought of Ricardo. He had a right to know, had the right to see the true face of his wife as she had seen the true face of her husband. Mariana knew where his architecture firm was located. She and Catalina had stopped by there once during their lunch break. The office was located 3 blocks from the central square, an old columned mansion converted into offices. Mariana climbed the marble steps and pushed open the heavy door. Ricardo sat behind a large desk piled with blueprints. Seeing Marianne, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Marianne, is something wrong?" She stood in the doorway of his office, looking at the man whose life was about to be ruined too. How to tell him? What words to describe what she saw? "Ricardo, we need to talk," her voice sounded muffled. "It's about Catalina and Mateo." He knew it all at once, in her face, in her tone, in the way her hands trembled. Slowly he set aside the pencil he held. "Sit down, Marianne. Tell me everything." And she did. About the strangeness of the last few weeks, about the changes in Matteo and Catalina's behavior, about the scene in the park today. She spoke in a dry, businesslike manner as if she were reading out the case history of another patient. Ricardo listened in silence. When she finished, there was a heavy silence in the office. Outside the window, the sunset was burning down, coloring the walls blood red. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I don't know," Marianne answered honestly. "Do you?" "Yeah?" He grinned bitterly. "I will do what I should have done long ago. Put an end to this farce." It was already dark when Marianne left the bureau. She walked slowly through the streets, not noticing passers-by or cars. Ricardo's last words echoed in her head. They deserve what they get. She never made it home. She called her mother-in-law and told her she was spending the night at a friend's house. Estella didn't ask any questions, only asked her to be careful. Marianne rented a room in a small hotel on the outskirts of the city and went to bed alone for the first time in 3 years. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, their perfect world would crumble completely. But tonight she just wanted to forget everything and go to sleep. The alarm clock in the hotel room sounded unusually abrupt. Marianne opened her eyes and looked at the unfamiliar ceiling for a few seconds, trying to realize reality. The events of yesterday came back with a new force. The park, the kiss, the conversation with Ricardo. The phone vibrated again. Another message from Matteo. "Where are you? I've been up all night. Please call me." It was followed by another. "Honey, let's talk. I'll explain everything." Marianne deleted both without reading the rest. The hotel room was small and impersonal. A standard bed, a nightstand, a closet, a small TV on the wall. But now this impersonality seemed almost cozy. No memories, no trace of their life together, nothing personal. Marianne took a shower, put on yesterday's clothes. The small mirror above the sink reflected her pale face with dark circles under her eyes. She pulled her makeup bag out of her purse. An automatic movement developed over the years. Tonal cream hid the traces of a sleepless night. Mascara made her eyes look lively. A mask of normality as fake as their marital happiness. There was a small cafeteria in the hotel lobby. Marianne ordered coffee and toast, though she had no appetite. Just needed to eat something to function. As she stirred the sugar in her cup, the phone vibrated in her pocket again. This time it was Catalina calling. "Marianne, where are you? I'm worried. Matteo said you didn't spend the night at home." Her voice sounded concerned, almost sincere. How well she'd learned to fake it over the months. Marianne dropped the call and turned off her phone. Right now she needed complete silence to gather her thoughts. She reached the clinic on foot, choosing small streets where there was less chance of bumping into someone. The city was just waking up. Vendors laying out their goods, janitors sweeping the sidewalks, early passers-by hurrying to work. An ordinary morning, an ordinary life, but for her, everything had changed irrevocably. At the clinic, the first thing she did was head to the head doctor's office. "Dr. Ortiz, I need time off. Family emergency." He looked at her carefully over his glasses. "Of course, Mariana. Take as many days as you need." There was a flicker of realization in his gaze. News travels fast in a small town. Surely he must have heard something by now, suspected something. After work, she went to the store. At the cash register, she ran into Catalina's mother-in-law, Senora Mendoza. She looked away defiantly, but then she couldn't take it anymore. "Satisfied? You ruined my son's family." "Excuse me, but didn't your daughter-in-law destroy 2 families?" As she left the store, Marianne spotted Matteo across the street. He was standing by his pickup truck, gaunt, unshaven. When he noticed her gaze, he jerked toward her but stopped. A minute later, his car roared away. A message from Ricardo was waiting for her at the hotel. "Catalina has moved out of the house. They say she's gone back to her parents. The lawyer is preparing divorce papers. Mariana sat on the bed, staring at the screen of her phone. The events of the last few days seemed unreal, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. But the pain was real, sharp, throbbing, not subsiding for a moment. The next morning she ran into Estella in the clinic hallway. "How are you, dear?" "Alive," Marianne tried to smile. "How's Javier?" "Not finding himself. Went to the farm, talked to the workers. Everyone's in shock about what happened. Mateo was a good manager, he was respected. And now everything's changed. Reputation in our town means a lot. Javier's already contacted Pablo. He's coming next week to take over the business." At that moment, a nurse, Lupita, came running down the corridor. "Hurry up! There's a fight at the front desk." Marianne hurried after Estella. A crowd had gathered in the lobby of the clinic. In the center was Ricardo, holding some man by the chest. Looking closer, Mariana recognized Catalina's father. "You dishonored my daughter!" Senor Valencia shouted. "You made a public scandal." "It was your daughter who disgraced herself," growled Ricardo in reply. "I have a right to know the truth." They were separated. Dr. Ortiz called for security. Senor Valencia, adjusting his wrinkled jacket, threw a sizzling glare at Mariana. "This is all because of you. You started all this." That evening there was a knock at the door of her hotel room. Estella stood on the doorstep with a basket of home-cooked food. "You're quite thin, girl. We must eat." They sat in the small kitchen, drinking tea and homemade cookies. Outside the window, the dusk was fading, and somewhere in the distance they could hear bells ringing. St. Rose's Church was calling the congregation to evening service. "You know," Estella said thoughtfully, "sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. Yes, it's hard on everyone right now, but the truth is better than a beautiful lie." Marianne remained silent, stirring the sugar in the cooled tea. She thought about how quickly life could change. A week ago she had a loving husband, a loyal friend, respect in society. Now there were only shards of it all. At night she couldn't sleep for a long time. Through the open window came the sounds of the city, the noise of cars, music from the neighboring bar, someone's voices. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, were the people whose lives she had changed with one decision to tell the truth. Mateo, who had lost his family and his inheritance. Catalina, returning to her parents as the prodigal daughter. Ricardo, starting life anew. But she had no regrets. Let the town talk. Let them judge her. She'd done the right thing. Lies cannot be the basis of happiness, even if the truth hurts. The day began with the first rays of the sun. Marianne lay on the narrow hotel bed, watching the sky outside the window lighten. There was no sleep. She had spent the entire night thinking about the upcoming events. The phone was silent. She had blocked Mateo and Catalina's numbers. There was a knock on the room door. The receptionist brought the breakfast she had ordered the night before. A cup of hot coffee, a fresh croissant, orange juice. Marianne forced herself to eat at least half of it. She would need her strength today. The clock showed 8 in the morning when she left the hotel. The morning air was fresh and clean after the overnight rain. She bought a fresh newspaper on the corner, a picture of the Torres farm on the front page. The article told about the plans to modernize production, about the future heir, Mateo. Mariana folded the paper before she finished. Soon everything would change. At 9 o'clock the phone rang. Ricardo. "I see them," his voice sounded tense. "They're meeting at the cafe in the square." "Good. Proceed as you see fit." Marianne headed toward her mother-in-law's house. Estella was waiting for her on the veranda, nervously thumbing her rosary, an old habit that betrayed excitement. "Javier is in his study," she said, hugging her sister-in-law. "He's ready to hear you out." Her father-in-law's study had always inspired awe in Marianne. Dark wood paneling, a massive desk, portraits of ancestors on the walls. Javier Torres sat in his leather chair, as imposing as the furnishings around him. "Have a seat, Mariana." His voice sounded softer than usual. "Estela told me about the situation." She sat down across from him, squaring her shoulders. The time for pretense was over. "Señor Torres, I have come to inform you that your son has dishonored the family name. He is having an affair with a married woman, my colleague Catalina Mendoza." Javier listened in silence, his face remaining impenetrable. Before they could finish their conversation, there was a noise in the house. Mateo's voice, the banging of doors, Estela's anxious exclamations. A moment later, the study door swung open. Mateo stood on the threshold, disheveled, with a busted lip and a bloodshot eye. His once immaculate shirt was torn and stained. "Dad, you have to help me," he faltered when he saw Marianne. "What is she doing here?" "Sit down." Javier's voice silenced him. "And explain what happened." "That psycho, Ricardo, attacked me in the cafe, beat me up in front of everyone, shouted something about treason, about betrayal. Isn't he right?" Mariana asked quietly. Mateo turned to her. "You? Did you tell him?" "No, dear. You were the one who told him everything. By your behavior, by your lies, by your meetings with Catalina. I simply opened Ricardo's eyes to the truth." "The truth?" Mateo laughed bitterly. "What truth? That you weren't paying attention to me, that you were absorbed in your work, that Catalina understood me better." Javier slapped his palm on the table. "Shut up! You dare accuse your wife of your infidelity?" "Dad, listen." "No, you listen." Javier stood up. "I've spent my life building our family's reputation, taught you honor, dignity, responsibility. And you? You dishonored our name, betrayed your wife, destroyed someone else's family." Estela entered the office, her face pale. "There's a scandal at the clinic. Ricardo came there after the cafe, made a scene with Catalina right during the appointment. She cried, ran away. Everyone already knows." Mateo collapsed in his chair. "Are you satisfied now?" He looked at Marianne. "Ruin my life?" "No, beloved," she said the word with bitter irony. "It was you yourself who ruined your life. I only helped the truth come out." Javier walked over to his son. "Pack your things and leave." "What?" "I'll think about what to do with your inheritance and future. Perhaps the farm should find another owner who at least knows what honor is." "Papa, you can't." "I can. I'll let you know my decision. You have sullied the Torres name too much." Mateo jumped up. "It was all her. She turned you against me." "No, son. It was you yourself who ruined everything. Now go away." Estela wept in a corner, pressing her handkerchief to her eyes. Mariana sat motionless, watching the life of the man she had once loved crumble. Mateo stalked out of the study, slamming the door. A moment later, the engine of his pickup truck roared into the yard. "I'm sorry, daughter." Javier put his hand on Mariana's shoulder. "I didn't realize I'd raised such a son." "Stay with us." Estela stepped up to her daughter-in-law. "This is your home, too." Marianne shook her head. "Thank you, but I have to go. It's not easy at the clinic right now either." Stepping outside, she took a deep breath. The sky was overcast. Rain was coming. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. It was as if nature was echoing the drama playing out in the Torres house. On the way to the clinic, she met several acquaintances. People averted their eyes, whispered behind their backs. News travels fast in a small town. Surely everyone already knew what had happened at the cafe and the clinic. At the entrance to the clinic, nurses and orderlies were crowding around, talking animatedly about the events. At the sight of Mariana, they fell silent. Rosario ran up to her. "Baby, are you okay?" This scandal. Catalina locked herself in the study, sobbing. Ricardo left, slamming the door. "Dr. Ortiz is in shock. It's okay, Rosario, Mariana walked by. Justice has been served. In her office, she sat down at her desk and felt tired for the first time in 2 days. The events of the last few hours flashed before her eyes like the frames of a movie. Mateo's beating, Javier's anger, Estella's tears, the whispers in the hallways. The phone vibrated again. A message from Ricardo. "I'm filing for divorce. Thank you for the truth." Marianne leaned back in her chair. Outside the window, the rain had begun to fall, the drops drumming on the glass. Somewhere out there in this small town, 2 families lay in ruins. But she felt no joy or satisfaction, only desolation. The morning was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over the town, promising rain. Marianne sat in Dr. Ortiz's office, listening to the wind outside the window. The head doctor had just given her the unexpected news. Catalina had officially resigned from the clinic and left for the capital. She mailed in her application. Dr. Ortiz wiped his glasses, avoiding looking Marianne in the eye. "They say her parents found a place for her in a private clinic, away from all that." Marianne nodded. The news didn't stir any emotion in her, as if it was about a complete stranger, not the woman who had recently been her close friend. As she left the head doctor's office, she ran into Estella. Her mother-in-law looked worried. "Honey, we need you. Javier wants to talk to you and Mateo. It's important." "I'm not ready to see him." "It's about the future of the farm. Please, Mariana, Javier insists." Everything in the Torres house was still the same heavy drapes, the same pictures on the walls, the same smell of fresh-baked goods from the kitchen. Only the atmosphere had changed. Now there was a tension as thick and palpable as the pre-threat air. Javier was waiting for them in his office. Mateo was already there, sitting in a chair by the window, gaunt and aged. At the sight of Mariana, he twitched, but stayed where he was. "Sit down, both of you." Javier spoke softly, but his voice filled the room. "This is going to be a tough conversation." Mariana sank into a chair as far away from Mateo as possible. Estella stood behind her husband's back, nervously thumbing her rosary beads. "Mateo," Javier began, "you have dishonored our family. By your behavior, you have proven yourself unworthy to be the heir to the Torres farm." "Papa, please," Mateo's voice trembled. "I made a mistake, I admit it, but the farm is my whole life." "No," Javier tapped his palm on the table. "The farm is the life of 5 generations of Torres. It is the labor of your ancestors, their sweat and blood. It's a legacy that demands honor and dignity. And you've betrayed not only your wife, you've betrayed every principle of our family." A heavy silence hung in the study. Outside the window, the rain began to fall. Large drops drummed on the glass as if to accompany the drama unfolding in the room. "I've made a decision," Javier continued. "The farm will go to Pablo. He's coming tomorrow. And you have no right to be here anymore." "What?" Mateo jumped up. "You can't do this. I'm your only son." "That's why it's especially painful for me to make this decision. But I don't have a choice. The Torres family's reputation has been built over centuries. I won't let you ruin it." Mateo turned to Mariana. "It was you. You set this whole thing up, turned my parents against me, deprived me of everything." "No, Mateo." She met his gaze calmly. "You deprived yourself of everything. By your actions, by your lies, by your betrayal." "Enough!" Javier's voice overrode the altercation that was beginning. "The decision has been made. Mateo, you have 1 week to retrieve your belongings from the farmhouse. After that, you are no longer a member of the Torres family." "Papa, please." Mateo collapsed to his knees in front of his father. "Give me another chance. I'll make it up to you." Too late. Javier turned away to the window. Some deeds can't be undone. Some wounds don't heal. You made your choice. Now live with it." Estella cried quietly in the corner. Marianne sat motionless, watching the life of the man she once loved crumble. Strangely, she felt no joy or fulfillment, only endless fatigue. Matteo rose from his knees, his face contorted with rage and pain. "All right, since you're all against me, I'll leave. But remember this day. You will regret this decision." He sprinted out of the office, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. A minute later, the engine of his pickup truck roared into the yard. "You did the right thing," Mariana said quietly, looking at her father-in-law's gaunt face. Javier sank heavily into the chair. "I know, but that doesn't make it any easier. He is my son after all." "Was your son," Estella corrected, wiping away tears. "Now he's a stranger." At that moment there was a knock at the door. A maid appeared on the threshold. "Señor Torres, the Valencia family's lawyer, is there. He says it's urgent." Javier nodded tiredly. "Send him in." The lawyer, a gaunt man in an expensive suit, bowed ceremoniously. "Señor Torres, I represent the Valencia family. They are seeking compensation for moral damages for publicly insulting their daughter's honor." "What?" Mariana couldn't take it anymore. It was their daughter who destroyed 2 families. "Señora Rojas," the lawyer turned to her, "your actions and those of Señor Mendoza have caused a public scandal that has irreparably damaged Señorita Catalina's reputation." "Señorita?" Mariana grinned bitterly. "She is a married woman who has been unfaithful to her husband with my spouse." "That has yet to be proved." The lawyer pulled papers from his briefcase. "In the meantime, we have witnesses to the public scandal at the cafe and the clinic. We have testimony of harassment and slander." "That's enough," Javier interrupted him. "Tell the Valencia family they won't get a peso. If they want a trial, be my guest. I have witnesses, too. And believe me, their daughter's reputation will suffer even more." When the lawyer left, a heavy silence hung in the office. The rain outside the window intensified, turning into a veritable downpour. "What's going to happen now?" Estella asked quietly. "Now?" Javier looked at the pictures of his ancestors on the walls. "Now a new chapter in the history of the Torres family will begin, one without traitors and liars." Mariana stood up. "I have to go. Thank you for everything." "You will always remain part of our family," Estella hugged her, "no matter what happens." Stepping outside, Marianne didn't bother to open her umbrella. Cold raindrops fell on her face, mixing with the tears she finally allowed herself to shed. Her whole world had changed irrevocably, but she knew she had done the right thing. More gossip had already begun to emerge in the small town. It was said that Matteo had been seen in a bar on the outskirts of town, drunk, sloppy, unlike his old self. They said Catalina was in a hurry to sell her house. There were whispers that the Valencia family had lost face in society. But Mariana didn't care. She walked through the streets, where every stone reminded her of the past, and thought about how sometimes you have to lose everything to start over. Without lies, without pretense, without fake smiles and empty promises. It had been a week since Javier had disinherited Matteo. The town was slowly returning to normal, though whispers and stares still haunted Mariana. She packed up their former home. It seemed alien and empty now, like a museum of unfulfilled hopes. On the kitchen table was a box of little things: wedding photos, postcards, small souvenirs from their trips together. Marianne methodically went through each item, deciding its fate. Most went into the trash. The past needed to be let go. The doorbell rang, taking her by surprise. An elderly neighbor, Señora Aguilar, stood on the threshold. "My girl, I brought you a pie. You've gotten quite thin these days." Mariana invited her in. They sat down on the veranda where she and Matteo used to spend quiet evenings. Señora Aguilar poured tea into cups. You know, I was friends with your mother-in-law for many years. I remember Mateo growing up. Always seemed like such a proper boy. Appearances can be deceiving. Marianne nibbled a piece of pie. Yes, sweetheart. But you know what I'll tell you? You did the right thing. In our town, a lot of wives turn a blind eye to their husbands cheating, pretend everything's fine, and you had the courage to tell the truth. At that moment, a familiar pickup truck drove down the street. Mateo had come to pick up the last of his things. He parked in front of the house, but was in no hurry to get out. "I'll go," Senora Aguilar fussed. "And you hang in there, girl. Time will put everything in its proper place." Mateo entered the house as the neighbor left. He looked out of place, a wrinkled shirt, stale stubble, a blank stare. There was no trace of his former confidence. "I'm getting my things," his voice sounded hoarse. "They're in the bedroom. I put everything together." He went upstairs, trying not to meet her gaze. Marianne could hear him pacing the room, opening cabinets, dropping something. Every sound reverberated with pain. Here, in this house, they were happy. Or did they only think they were? Reaching down with the box in his hands, Mateo stopped at the door. "You know, I really loved you. It's just, things got out of hand somehow." Love doesn't look for excuses, Mateo. It's either there or it's not. He crumpled on the threshold as if he wanted to add something, but changed his mind. The front door slammed, the engine roared, and all was quiet. Marianne went to the window. Mateo's pickup truck sped around the corner, driving away the last remnants of their shared past. That evening she drove to her mother-in-law's house. Estella was waiting for her on the veranda with herbal tea and homemade cookies. Old habits don't change even when the world falls apart. "Pablo arrived this morning," Estella reported, pouring the tea. "Javier is showing him around the farm. He seems like a smart guy, serious, responsible." "How's Javier?" "He's hanging in there, but I can hear him crying at night. Mateo is his only son, after all." They were silent for a moment, staring at the sunset. Somewhere in the distance they could hear cows mooing, the familiar sounds of the farm that now seemed an echo of another life. "What do you think you're going to do next?" Estella asked. "I don't know yet. Dr. Ortiz has offered a promotion. Catalina's place is still open, but I'm not sure I want to stay at the clinic. Maybe it's for the best. Sometimes you need a fresh start." The next day in town, Mariana ran into Ricardo. He had lost a noticeable amount of weight, but he held himself upright and confident. "The divorce is finalized," he said in lieu of a greeting. "Catalina didn't even show up in court, sent the papers in the mail. How are you?" "Alive. Working on a new project. Restoration of an old church in a neighboring town. I want to go there for a while until things settle down here." "I see. I'm thinking about leaving too." They stood in the middle of the empty street, two people whose lives had shattered and were now slowly being reassembled like shards of a broken mirror. In the evening, Marianne took a long walk through the city. Past the Valencia house, where Catalina now lived, the windows were dark. Only in Senor Valencia's study was the light on. Past the bar where Mateo was often seen. Today he wasn't there. Past Ricardo's architectural office, a sign on the door read, "Closed for renovation." Her steps led to the city park, the same park where she'd seen Mateo and Catalina together. The park was empty now, with only the wind rustling the leaves and the lanterns casting whimsical shadows. A lone figure sat on the bench where everything had happened. Looking closer, Mariana recognized Catalina's mother. Senora Valencia noticed her too. "Sit down, Mariana. I think we have something to talk about." Mariana hesitated, but then sat down next to her. They were silent for a while, looking up at the darkening sky. "I have been unfair to you," Senora Valencia finally said, "trying to protect my daughter by blaming everyone around her. But the truth is, she chose her own path." "Where is she now?" "In the capital. She's taken a job at a private clinic. Says she's starting a new life." She grinned bitterly. As if you could just erase the past like that. You can't, but you can learn to live with it. They parted at sunset, each going in their own direction, taking with them a piece of their shared pain and shared past. At home, Marianne sat down at her desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She was going to write a letter of resignation from the clinic for a long time. The capital also needed good doctors, and she had always dreamed of working in a large hospital. A cool breeze blew in through the open window, bringing the smells of spring. Somewhere in the distance could be heard the noise of the city. The usual evening life was going on. Marianne looked at her reflection in the mirror, a tired face but lively eyes. She had stood her ground, not broken, preserved her dignity. The future was unclear, but in this uncertainty lurked its own charm. No obligations, no expectations, just a blank sheet of paper and the right to write her new story on it.